and welcome to another edition of Today with Dr. Wendy. I'm Wendy Patrick. My co-host Larry Dersham and I have a great show for you tonight as always, but because this is our Christmas edition, one of the questions we've been fielding for weeks is one that families are asking all across the globe. How do we keep families together during COVID holiday season? Given all of the restrictions, the distance, the anxiety, everything that comes along with the holiday season to begin with, much less in the season of a pandemic. So the pandemic has impacted both health and wealth. That's right, we have suffered physically and financially. But part of that physical suffering that people don't talk enough about is it emotionally. And this is not just due to the anxiety of job loss. For many people, social distance has produced a sense of social isolation, even though it's just physical separation. I mean, let's face it, there's a big difference, and a big difference indeed during the holidays, between socializing in your living room versus in a Zoom room, no matter how well you know the people in all those other little squares. Proximity creates chemistry. And let's face it, absence isolates. So families have become quite creative this season, coming up with ways to cross the distance. From plexiglass to patio parties, weather permitting, which we actually can do here in San Diego, to exploring creative ways to gather together. That's exactly what we're doing collectively. And the reason we can do it now and we couldn't do it in March is we have come a long way in understanding how to stay safe. We are masked, gloved, sanitized, and socially distanced. Regarding face coverings, we now know the difference between a bandana and an N95. Now, in my family, we wear those hats with the attached plastic shields. We all look like beekeepers. But knowledge is power. Smart social distancing routines have made us COVID savvy. We know how to gather together safely. And I'll tell you, many families have even gone so far as to mandate COVID testing. You even have to do that right and time that right to be able to get that together. In fact, some families have done voluntary quarantining, each of them for 2 weeks before the gathering to ensure a safe, maskless Christmas. Now, Larry, I don't know how you and your family are doing it, but I have heard all sorts of machinations of this going on across the nation as to how we can actually strategize gathering safely. Any ideas?
Well, my daughter told me about an idea that she gets together with some of her girlfriends. She's married, she's got a family, but her old friends, they still get together several times a year. And they had this idea of a gift exchange. I think they do a gift exchange every year. But the idea, I was really proud of my daughter. She said, we are going to buy gifts only in small businesses. We will not go to the big box stores to buy our gifts.
Nice.
We are going to emphasize that, get really unique gifts. In fact, when you think about it, you'll probably find more unique gifts in the small businesses than you would in the big box stores.
No, I think that's great. And, in terms of gathering together, creatively, we want to host a celebration, not a super spreader event. And that also is probably less likely if we avoid the big stores, just for the meantime, especially if, we all have our beloved elderly family members. We want to protect them as well. One silver lining, and you've heard me say this before, COVID has impacted families a different way this year. And it has made us appreciate family more. And that even goes for that one colorful character around the Christmas dinner table that wants to talk politics. So, we don't have to ban red hats or political conversation. Instead of counting seats, let's count our blessings that we have so many chairs around the Christmas dinner table. Now, when it comes to what your daughter is celebrating, however, do we have small businesses, large businesses? I do have to say that we in San Diego, as with other jurisdictions, have suffered a little bit of legal whiplash this last week, with businesses and restaurants in particular quickly opening, then quickly closing. And we have a we're holding a ruling in abeyance now while a higher court has reviewed it. A ruling that really made headlines because it talked about strip clubs, but actually was applicable to businesses that have restaurant service. So we're not just talking about strip clubs, we were talking about all sorts of restaurants. But now, maybe those that opened for the last 2 days, Now I understand they're closed once again. Larry, what's the latest here?
This week has been a whirlwind, Wendy. Judge Wolfel of he's a Superior Court judge here in the Southern California area. On Tuesday, I'm just talking about last Tuesday, December 15th, he said it's okay for strip clubs to open. They're an essential business. Well, those strip clubs happen to have the two that were the litigants had restaurants in them. And so that was great. So people were thinking, okay, does that apply to restaurants too? And so then on Thursday, December 17th, 2 days later, the judge clarified his decision and he said, yes, this applies to all restaurants. And I could even remember hearing on the radio just yesterday that Supervisor Jim Desmond said, this is great, now the restaurants can open. But wouldn't you know it, on Friday, December 18th, that's yesterday, the state did an emergency appeal and they got a court of appeal to stay that order of the Superior Court judge. So we're back to lockdown.
Well, it is true that San Diego restaurants have been temporarily stripped of their right to operate, so to speak. However, isn't there a middle ground we can advocate for? I mean, one of the distinguishing factors among many that were argued in the case of the two strip clubs is that unlike ordering chicken wings from Hooters or something like that, where you can actually take it out, maybe you go to a restaurant like that for more than the food. But unlike that, what these two clubs were offering as businesses, you can't do it curbside, you certainly can't deliver it, and you can't bring it outside. You can't have parents driving kids past a striptease. So those three considerations made those clubs different from restaurants in general, yet it was almost the vehicle, the unlikely vehicle through which wholesome restaurants of all types were able to briefly reopen. But if the concern is the spread of COVID, which it is, one of the things that judges have been asking across the nation is where is the nexus? Where is the nexus between restaurants being open, even if it's just patio service, and ICU hospital beds? And if you can't say anybody's catching COVID, or at least you can't prove it with any certainty from restaurants that are, again, they're a sea of plexiglass when you go into these places. Servers are masked, gloved, sanitized, socially distanced. If we can't prove that anybody's actually catching COVID from these establishments, that by the way, was one of the things argued by the two strip clubs. If you can't prove it, should that be a basis to close down? That's just an interesting legal argument that's being made. And Larry, I understand there's a new deadline of next Wednesday to come up with some new arguments to continue to argue this.
Oh, that's right. It's a new deadline, and Wednesday is the date where these the lawyers for the strip clubs have to come back in and prove why they should be remain open. But I would just say that, again, this is an example of overreach. The restaurants and the small businesses, what do? You're open one day, and before you can even get your tables or your food supplies up, you're closed again. Nobody can survive that. And I just think that there's something more going on about this. I think it's about control, about social control. Did you see that video, Wendy, of this little 2-year-old? A family was flying on United Airlines, and the 2-year-old, it showed a video of them trying to put a mask on their 2-year-old. Yes. She refused, and eventually they kicked the whole family off the plane. A 2-year-old.
Yeah, and that begs the question that we were talking about earlier is, can you prove that anybody would be likely to catch COVID from a 2-year-old, assuming the little baby was even infected? And that goes again to, we've come a long way since March. When we closed everything down in March, we didn't know how it was spread. We didn't know how to protect ourselves. Part of the reason more people are comfortable venturing out nowadays is we do know much more about the virus, how it's transmitted, how to protect ourselves. We know the difference between an N95 and a bandana, the example I gave earlier. And if we know those differences, shouldn't those be taken into consideration in deciding when we will or won't enforce these kinds of rules?
Exactly. I think that's true. So true. And I think that, of course, we're going to fight the appeal through the appellate process. Like next Wednesday, these restaurants and the strip clubs will be back in court with their appeal. But I also have been thinking about the idea, what about civil disobedience? What if they had mass civil disobedience? You open your restaurant and you call your opening a protest. How would they go against that? Now, I know the restaurants that have liquor licenses would be extra worried and maybe they shouldn't do that. And what if customers were to sign liability waivers? They say, I'm going to eat here, and I promise if I eat here, if I get COVID, I won't use the ICU or something like that. I don't know if that would work legally.
They'd be fined, and they'd get cease and desist letters, and then they'd probably be fined. And we know that because that actually has been taking place. However, it's an interesting point that you make, Larry, because both strip clubs were actually open in violation of the stay-at-home, the closed-down order. And that is actually one of the things that they used to argue all of the precautions they put into place. They had the ruling calls them artists. The dancers were 15 feet away from patrons. The counter argument to that is, yeah, but the patrons are right next to each other, and this is a tough time to be a public official because you're basically taking the advice of the health departments in deciding whether or not to keep businesses open and closed. We got to wrap up the first half. Gosh, we could talk about this forever. But folks, do not touch that dial, because when we return after the break, you are going to meet a person that might just be the nation's leading authority on how to protect your children and family from being exposed to harmful content on the internet. You do not want to miss this. You are listening to Today with Dr. Wendy. We will be back in a flash. Welcome back to Today with Dr. Wendy. I'm Wendy Patrick. As a career prosecutor, I am consistently worried about pandemic restrictions and stay-at-home orders increasing exploitation of the vulnerable. And that, of course, includes children, who are uniquely vulnerable in so many ways. How can we keep our precious young ones safe, especially from cyber predators? Well, thankfully, our next guest has some answers. Larry, who do we have on the line?
Yes, Wendy, I'm so pleased to introduce Donna Rice Hughes. Donna is president and CEO of Enough is Enough, and she's an internationally known internet safety expert. She's an author, a speaker, and a film producer. And since 1994, she's been a pioneering leader on the front lines of the U.S. efforts to make the internet safer for children and families. And she's done such amazing work. We want to hear what she has to say. I'm so pleased to have her. Welcome to the show, Donna.
Donna, as a trial lawyer for more years than I'm going to admit, because I'm afraid a listener will do the math, let's just say I've litigated human trafficking, rape cases, sex crimes. I'm well aware of the harmful effects that internet pornography has on families, especially children. But Donna, this is your area of expertise. This is your wheelhouse. How bad has the problem been during the pandemic?
During the pandemic has skyrocketed. Cases of child pornography were already a pandemic level. There were 45 billion new videos and images of young children reported before the pandemic started. And the first month after lockdown, it's been up 63%.
Wow.
The month after lockdown, 40% back to the 40%. 80% increase in parent searching for help and cyberbullying. And here's the thing. Predator prey, you know this, you see this. Predator prey is children prey. And so when you got lockdown and virtual learning and all this, all this time online, with entertainment and everything, with their parents trying to tell them working from home and everything else, it's going to be online. Why? Because that is a prime place to meet and to bring kids. Now, pornography has always been addictive, and it still is. In fact, kids under the age of 10 now account for 22% of hardcore porn consumption. So, yeah, it's bad. And it's bad, and it's continuing to increase. So this is something that every parent needs to be aware of, to qualify and really learn how to take action and be a fantastic cyber parent.
Well, Donna, I work with, and Wendy too. Wendy's our chief instructor for the National Law Center for Children and Families, and we also fight child sexual exploitation. And I just wanted to get your thoughts about, there's a new program going through our school now called Comprehensive Sexuality Education, or just CSE for short. And basically a lot of the parents are arguing that's too much, too soon. Explicit type graphics and so forth. And it's going so low on the grade level. and actually kind of start them even in elementary school sometimes. So what are your thoughts on the CSE? Is that good or bad, or what should we do?
To be aware of what's coming and stand up and speak out. From what I've heard, seen is very disturbing from my standpoint. And that's how my area that teach the curriculum. But no, here's the thing, that the expectation of children is coming in from all types of places that parents may not be aware of. Certainly, curriculum are one of them. And I still say that what's happening on the internet is absolutely devastating. And kids are not being even smart, good, well-mannered kids are sitting up for sexual predators, traffickers, pornographers.
Donna, you've mentioned something, and I'm going to put it into a really concise sentence that hopefully we can remember as parents. Predators prey where children play. That is so powerful, and
That's
that is
good.
so, it's memorable and it's important. Do you have like a top 5 list of things that parents can do given this reality? We know this in real life. That's why we watch our kids when they're at the playground, but we forget the same principle operates online.
That's right, and that is even more and more powerful online, because in the physical world, they're using some type of veil around it.
Or supervision. Yeah.
Anything and everything goes, all the good and all the bad. So, yeah, put out 5 steps to protect yourself online, but a lot of information at internetsafety101.org. So I would say the top things are to recognize your kids are not immune and to use the software technology that is available by most providers on every single internet device that your kid uses. That's gaming devices, smartphones, laptops, you name it. Because if they're connected to the internet, they can get all the bad stuff, all the bad guys can reach them. So key parts of that are to turn off the filters and to use monitoring technology, kind of like the yin and the yang of software. Also, you can use time limiting tools. And for younger kids, I don't even recommend that they're on the internet. You can play games, you can do a lot of things without connected online, playing games with strangers and that sort of thing. The other is to have regular communication with your kids about what they're doing, and they're talking to you, and build that atmosphere of trust. So, you're gonna get into some basic level out there, and the parents need to be the first line of defense, but also that trust development solid conversation.
Donna, are you getting any cooperation, for example, from the Department of Justice or local authorities in this fight?
No, it is. That's what it was. The Department of Justice and state U.S. attorneys and state attorneys general are very aggressively focused on child pornography, which means child sex abuse images, and also on trafficking. And that's where they're spending 95% of their time, and also trafficking on predators. However, we have not had any of the hardcore pornography laws before general as law. And pornography is one of the biggest issues that kids are struggling with, like I said. And this isn't your mother's pornography for yesteryear. This is also about hardcore, extraneous, teen rape. The things that I can't even say on the air. And this is really in effect becoming the sex educator, sex educator for their kids. And so it's conditioning them, conditioning their attitudes, their expectations, to go really well. This is a guy thing. This is a girl, very young girls are getting hooked up with as well.
How is it, Donna, that so many parents and even older siblings and teachers, and you can think of all the adult authority figures that young people have in their lives, how is it that so many children that are so young are able to be on the internet, on these devices as it is? Now, I understand that it doesn't matter if a parent doesn't buy their children devices. They'll just go to school and use their friends' devices. But aren't there any sort of rules or regulations in some of these, educational institutions that ban those devices? Or do we just live in a day and age where it's expected that every 8-year-old is going to have a cell phone?
Well, I think it really depends on the school district. I will tell you that in 1997, I guess it was, I didn't know this a really long time, that we decided to put on law passed that required schools and libraries to filter internet, child pornography and pornography, period.
Great.
Any government money under internet is supposed to be filtering. Now, fast forward where we are now, we've got Google donating Chromebooks like candy, and schools across the country, it's not filtered typically. You also now have Wi-Fi and kids, like you said, Vicky, bringing their own devices into the school. We really need to look at this again from a federal perspective and get that law updated.
Wow, that is up. Are you circulating a petition now, Donna? I understand. And what's about? What is it about?
Yes, correct. But the one we just want is we're calling on the Department of Justice and state prosecutors to investigate Pornhub.
Good.
Pornhub is the largest pornographer is online in the world. And it has been discovered as recent that they also have child rape content on their site, videos of traffic victims, and it goes on and on and on. So our DOJ is to investigate Pornhub for child pornography, for trafficking, and also for obscene pornography. We have not to start treating pornography in court, these moral court, pornographic content does not protect the speech. Most of the time, like these companies like Pornhub are, it's not that it's prosecutable. The pornography that they're marketing is prosecutable, and it is available for free.
Yeah, Donna, we have to leave it there, unfortunately. I'm going to sort of try to end this with a silver lining, however. Thank God there are people like you fighting this fight on the front lines, protecting the children of this world. So thank God there are people like you, Donna. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for all of our listeners for joining us as well. This is our last chance to say Merry Christmas to all of you. Have a wonderful, safe weekend. Please join us next week for more of Today with Dr. Wendy, Headlines with a Silver Lining. Have a great one, and God bless you.